Hi, BookTube, it's Amy. I'm back once again with some entries from the Journal of Emily Shore. This book here, published in 1891, which contains the diary entries of a teenage girl in the United Kingdom living in the 1830s. And we are just entering the summer of 1833. We're about to read the entry for June 29th, 1833. In the evening, Mrs. Renard related the following singular story. A little girl was playing before the house when a beggar woman came up and begged. She had a baby in her arms, and the child was so delighted with it, that she asked the woman if she would sell it to her. What will you give me for it, miss? Asked the woman. She replied, half a crown, which was all the money she had. The woman agreed. The half-crown was brought, and the child took the baby, carried it upstairs, and laid it on her bed. By and by she came scampering down to her mamma, calling out, Mamma, Mamma, I have got a live doll. I long wanted to have one, but now I have got it. Her mamma would not believe it, but the child persisted and begged the servant might be sent up to examine. This was done, and the baby was found lying on her bed. When asked how she had got it, she said she had bought it and told her story. Her parents sent all over the town for the woman, but she had taken herself off. At first it was resolved to send the baby to be supported by the parish, but the girl, who was an only child, petitioned so hard against it that it was resolved to adopt the infant, who was a girl. It was accordingly brought up and educated, and on the death of the daughter, when grown up, she became heir to the property of her foster parents. This extraordinary story is certainly true, for the parties were known to Mrs. Renaud's grandmother. And if that is true, that certainly is an extraordinary story, and I can only imagine how desperate a mother would have to be to sell her child for half a crown, or negligent perhaps to sell her child for half a crown. To another child, essentially. But it's quite likely that story isn't even true. July 6th. My poor little lark is very ill today. He will scarcely either move, eat, or drink, but sits shivering and panting. I suspect the cause is that I gave him a sow thistle yesterday. I much fear that he will die. If he does, he shall miss very much, for he is a universal pet. By the advice of the boy's own book and Mrs. Keel, I gave him a little saffron and licorice in his water, besides 3 fat spiders, which he ate greedily. July 8, Monday. All of us continue to watch with great anxiety the condition of our favorite little lark. All yesterday he continued dull, and pretty much so today, but at 6 o'clock a decided improvement took place. His appetite had been before returning, but he now began to lift his head and look about him, and he even began to plume, peck, and shake himself. Still, he had no strength to stand up actually, and whenever he wished to move, toddled along with help of his wings, though only for a moment. He drinks readily, and once tried to clean his beak, so that I have great hopes for him. 2 or 3 times he crowed. July 9th, Tuesday. The lark continues much the same. While I was cleaning out his cage, I put him on the table beside Mamma, and there he remained some time after, while I was shelling and bruising his hemp seed. For Richard, when he went to Potton today, applied to Mr. Tebbit, his former master, about him. By his advice, I feed him with a mess of the yolk of an egg, boiled very hard and chopped quite fine, mixed with bread, crumbled and bruised hemp seed. He is also to drink toast and water, and the first day plain water, the next, and on the third plain water and saffron. Mr. Tebbit decidedly attributes his illness to sow thistle, and I can't imagine that's very sound advice to be, when they say toast and water, I'm assuming toast crumbs mixed in the water, which probably didn't do this poor bird any good. I would imagine that would, exacerbate his digestion issues as opposed to helping them. And I would also question the wisdom in giving a bird a yolk boiled, and I'm assuming this is probably a chicken egg, so yolk from a boiled chicken egg. Certainly it would be natural for a baby bird to eat the contents of an egg, but probably not so natural for a lark to be eating a chicken egg. But we'll see where this goes and whether this bird survives. While I was preparing his food, the lark toddled up to observe my proceedings, and shortly after he walked on farther till and tumbled himself down into my lap. There he sat quietly for almost an hour and greedily ate his food, which was given him. He retained his rancorous hatred of the goldfinch, for he screamed even when he flew over his cage. July 10th, Wednesday. After 7 o'clock in the evening, Mamma took a walk with us to the heath. Amongst the bogs I found several flowers. The bog pimpernel quite covers the ground and makes a most beautiful appearance, with its elegant and delicate little blossoms. The cross-leaved heath also grows in great numbers and has very beautiful rose-colored flowers. But what I valued most was that rare plant, the asphodel in Latin, the Narcinthium ossifragum, which I have before found in seed but never in flower till now. It is a liliaceous plant and is of the class Hexandria monogyna. It grows on an upright, strong, unbranched stem with a few narrow, doubled sessile leaves veined with red. The stem is likewise reddish. The flowers grow at the top in something like a spike, with a colored calyx in 6 long divisions, a rarity among liliaceous plants. The blossoms are very beautiful, and they are nearly as large as those of the upright St. John's wort. The petals are yellow, tipped with red, and spreading out like a star. The stamens are bright yellow, beautifully fringed. The anthers are scarlet, and the pistil yellow. The buds are red and yellow. Besides these, I found the Ranunculus flammula, a ranunculus with yellow leaves, which is superior to everything else to be taken in cases where poison has been swallowed, which it is desirable to throw up instantly. So wonderful, wonderful. Whatever this flower is, I guess it'll make you vomit. I suppose good in cases of poisoning, probably quite unpleasant in most cases. The distilled juice is what is used. I gathered some more valerian in the wood and found that it had not, as I supposed, perfect flowers on steminiferous plants, but sometimes produced 4 stamens instead of 3. Still, however, on my first specimen, there are a few perfect flowers, which is very remarkable. July 11th, Thursday. My lark, though still ill and weak, continues to show his instinct, for he bit Mackworth's finger, which had a bandage on, and tried to pull off some gold beater skin from my thumb. He also has tried to fly a little. July 15th, Monday. I am delighted to view the improvement in my lark's health. He is quite brisk and lively, and can crow, scream, and bask in the sun as before. He cannot, however, fly a long way, nor does he sing, but he will certainly recover. He has now been ill 9 days. As for the goldfinch, he cannot fly at all on account of his wounded wing, but he is as pert and conceited as ever. July 18th, Thursday. Tuesday evening witnessed the first of those tea parties under the shade of the ash, which had been anticipated ever since December. We indeed spend our whole days in this hot weather out of doors, as soon as the morning dew is off. On all these occasions, the lark in his cage is brought out and sits with us under the ash and is most beautifully interesting and intelligent. And I'm just going to pause for a minute because this is reminding me of my own childhood. Not so much tea parties under the shade of an ash, but bringing the bird out of doors on those especially hot days, where you would stay out in the yard all day, and you would bring your pet bird out. We had budgies when I was growing up. You would bring your budgies out in their cage and set that cage, in the shade or under the patio umbrella, so that those birds could enjoy the fresh breeze as well, rather than being shut up in the stuffy house. And just a sudden memory, a memory I had sort of forgotten. And you would hear them chirping on and off, and quite enjoying it, almost as much as the humans, I suppose. And she goes on to talk about the lark. He evidently likes company very much better than solitude, and is constantly chirping and crowing to bring people about him, still continuing his love for flies. When people put their mouths to his cage, he kisses them. That is, he lays his beak on their lips and even puts it into their mouths. We had a consultation yesterday as to the safety of allowing him a little run under the ash. It was urged that he knew us so well that if he did escape, he would certainly return. That he never flies far in a room at least, but goes walking about, and here he would be engaged by picking up insects. That he would conceive himself to be bounded here as in a room, etc. But the danger of his escaping forever and the disappointment that would ensue prevailed. And that reminds me also of the day that one of our budgies, the first one we ever had, accidentally got out of doors. We would let her out of her cage in the house on a daily basis, and she would fly about, and there were perches, and she'd find a home on the curtain rod. But one day we had a guest at our door, and she was out of her cage, and without realizing, she'd never done it before, but without us realizing, she flew straight, through the kitchen. And actually no, I think it was the front of the house. So she flew, right into the entryway of the house and out the front door. And we were quite distressed, of course, my siblings and I. But my dad took the bird's cage out into the backyard and, set it out under the trees, left the door open, and we waited several hours. And we could sort of hear her, somewhere up in the trees, because budgies have a somewhat distinct sound as opposed to, the native birds of southern Ontario. We could hear her, and eventually she did, spot her cage and come down and go inside, and then we closed the door. And she was rescued and went back into the house, and that never happened again. We were always much more careful if she was out of her cage and flying about the house when doors to the outside were open. But it was almost unbelievable because for several hours we really did think she was probably lost, gone forever, probably going to die before long, because certainly a budgie that's been in captivity its whole life can't survive in the wild, certainly not in an environment that the birds aren't native to. But she did come back, and she lived several more years after that. But moving on, July 22nd. The lark grows tamer and tamer every day. He runs up to people and follows them about the room. He has even learnt to sit on people's hands and there eat flies. His manners are so interesting, engaging, and void of fear that it is impossible not to love him. I saw from my window today a little blue tomtit in a lark's tree. It would suspend itself at the end of the feeblest twigs, which hang perpendicular, and there, head downwards, swing backwards and forwards as the wind rocked the boughs. And maybe we'll just do one more entry and then we'll leave it there for today. July 23rd, Tuesday. My lark is quite a companion to me now in my room. He jumps on my hand, walks about the table and on my desk, examines my pencils, netting and work, and is as familiar as possible. Today R was writing a letter. The lark placed himself on the paper, and every time the pen came down, he pecked it and curiously examined the stroke it made. And birds are quite curious creatures. Somewhat intelligent, but mostly just curious. I recall our budgies. One of them had a real liking for uncooked raw ramen, like the Mr. Noodles or the quick ramen that comes in a package. If one of that were being opened and, there were some crumbs that had fallen or, someone was eating it cooked or raw at the table, she would come over for a little taste. Probably not the best for her, but she did like that flavor. And Lego bricks as well. We would dump, my brother and I, we would dump his Lego bricks all over the floor. This huge giant Tupperware bin he had. And she would come down to just walk amongst the bricks. I think it was probably all the colors and the shininess that attracted her. But none of our budgies were ever that tame. We never purchased any of them. They were rehomed pets from other people that we knew, because unfortunately, a lot of people would get their child a bird, or in one case, two birds. And really, they shouldn't be, singular. If you're going to have a budgie, you should have at least two, because they are birds that do better with companions. But we knew several people over the years in my childhood who had purchased budgies for their children, and then I guess realized how much work it was to look after these budgies, and that perhaps they weren't as fun or as tame as they had hoped. And so on several occasions, my dad would bring one home from someone that he knew, and we'd set the cage up in the living room, and we had our first one for about 5 years. And shortly after she passed on, just by coincidence, someone he worked with was trying to rehome another set of budgies, and so we took them in. And then not long after that, someone else we knew, a neighbor just around the block, was also trying to rehome their budgie. And so we had 3 of them together at once, 2 separate cages. The 2 that were companions had their cage, and then the third had her own cage as well, because obviously you don't want to mix birds that don't know each other too well, as evidenced here by the lark and the goldfinch, who don't like each other. But of course, if they're not trained or used to humans or bonding with humans from the start, then they never really become that tame. And so the sort of budgies we had, they flew about. You could go and look at them and talk to them, but they weren't the kind who would sit on your finger or get up and close and personal with you, because they were quite skittish. I mean, birds are wild animals, as you would expect, but it was still great fun to have budgies growing up, and it's something I would probably consider doing at some point again in my life, getting a couple of budgies, but it would have to be a larger place. I certainly wouldn't have them in this apartment, where they wouldn't have much space to fly around, and there would not really be any opportunity for me to take their cage outside and give them some fresh air on a nice summer's day. But I have rambled on long enough about pet birds, so I will leave it here, and I will see you all again soon with some more entries from the Journal of Emily Shore.